We are taught that the courts defend our liberties, that they are the last line of defense. Their ruling must be respected. What about when they uphold arresting someone for living near where they were born? What was the court thinking? A third infamous decision: Korematsu versus the United States. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked the U.S. naval base in Pearl Harbor and bases in the Philippines, Wake Island, Guam, and Midway, forcing the United States into World War II. During the rest of December, the news was grim. On the 10th, Japan invaded the Philippines and Guam. The next day, Burma, and then a few days later, British Borneo, followed by Hong Kong. On the 22nd, the Japanese invaded the island of Luzon in the Philippines, forcing General Douglas MacArthur to start his withdrawal. From then into February, the story was of Japanese victory and advance, with American and British defeat and withdrawal. For many Americans, the shock of entering the war, combined with the uncertainty of the outcome, was extremely unsettling. Midway, the first real victory in the war, would not happen until June 4th and 5th. Thus, in the early months of the war, there was a real fear that a Japanese attack on the West Coast was only a matter of time. To prepare for possible attack, the West Coast was divided into military zones, and some called for the removal of those of Japanese descent from the West Coast. When the Justice Department raised constitutional issues, the task was given to the Army. On February 19, 1942, Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, stating,
"The successful prosecution of the war requires every possible protection against espionage and against sabotage."
And he
authorize and direct the Secretary of War and the military commanders to prescribe military areas in such places and of such extent as he or the appropriate military commander may determine, from which any or all persons may be excluded.
This executive order was the basis for the removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast to 10 internment camps in 6 states. While at first the relocation was voluntary, that did not last long. On March 21st, Congress made failure to follow Executive Order 9066 a crime. And on March 29th, the relocation was made mandatory, with evacuees given only 48 hours notice to dispose of their property and businesses and report to assembly centers. Due to the enforced quick sale, the loss was later estimated at $1.3 billion. Born in Oakland, California, Fred Korematsu worked with his parents in a family-owned nursery. When he got his orders to report to an assembly center, he felt,
"I was an American citizen, and I had as much rights as anyone else. I don't even have ties with Japan, nor have I ever been there. To be accused like this, I just thought it wasn't fair. It was wrong."
So he changed his name, got a job as a welder, and planned to leave the West Coast. On May 30th, he was stopped and arrested. This case eventually made it to the Supreme Court in October of 1944. By this time, Korematsu had been released from the camp after filling out a loyalty questionnaire on the condition he stay away from the West Coast. He settled in Detroit. The court issued its opinion on December 18th in a 6-3 decision upholding Korematsu's conviction. The majority decision, written by Justice Hugo Black, actually started on a promising note. Black wrote,
"It should be noted, to begin with, that all legal restrictions which curtail the civil rights of a single racial group are immediately suspect. That is not to say that all such restrictions are unconstitutional. it is to say that courts must subject them to the most rigid scrutiny. Pressing public necessity may sometimes justify the existence of such restrictions. Racial antagonism never can.
This doctrine has since come to be called strict scrutiny. Still, despite this statement, the court gave the central issue little, if any, scrutiny, deferring the matter instead to the Army's judgment.
We cannot reject as unfounded the judgment of the military authorities and of Congress that there were disloyal members of that population, whose number and strength could not be precisely and quickly ascertained. We cannot say that the war-making branches of the government did not have ground for believing that in a critical hour, such persons could not readily be isolated and separately dealt with, and constituted a menace to the national defense and safety, which demanded that prompt and adequate measures be taken to guard against it.
Justice Owen Roberts started his dissent starkly, writing,
"I dissent because I think the indisputable facts exhibit a clear violation of constitutional rights."
He then proceeded to detail the problem with the ruling, concluding,
"I would reverse the judgment of conviction."
Justice Frank Murphy's dissent begins,
"This exclusion of all persons of Japanese ancestry, both alien and non-alien, from the Pacific Coast area on a plea of military necessity in the absence of martial law ought not to be approved. Such exclusion goes over the very brink of constitutional power and falls into the ugly abyss of racism."
Justice Robert Jackson also dissented, pointing out,
Korematsu was born on our soil, of parents born in Japan. The Constitution makes him a citizen of the United States by nativity and a citizen of California by residence. No claim is made that he is not loyal to this country. There is no suggestion that apart from the matter involved here, he is not law-abiding and well-disposed. Korematsu, however, has been convicted of an act not commonly a crime. It consists merely of being present in the state whereof he is a citizen, near the place where he was born, and where all his life he has lived.
He concluded by saying the military order by which Korematsu was convicted
has no place in law under the Constitution. I would reverse the judgment and discharge the prisoner.
As with Dred Scott and Plessy v. Ferguson, history has not been favorable to the court ruling. Korematsu's conviction was vacated in 1983. In a 2018 decision, the court officially overturned it, with Chief Justice John Roberts writing,
"Korematsu was gravely wrong the day it was decided, had been overruled in the court of history, and, to be clear, has no place in law under the Constitution."
Like the Dred Scott decision and Plessy v. Ferguson, Korematsu v. the United States is considered anti-canon by virtually all modern legal scholars. Mistakes by the court. Thank you for listening to Into the Desert, exploring the wilderness of thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe and put your comments below. Remember, be civil. We want to foster discussion and not division.